Hi, everybody. Welcome to Film Music Media. My name is Kai Savas, and tonight we have a very special treat. I'm sitting down with Graham Norgate and Grant Kirkhope, the co-composers of GoldenEye 64. With the re-release on the Nintendo Switch and Xbox, I think it is the perfect time to go back and look at one of the most iconic video games ever made, and arguably one of the most iconic video game scores ever made. This is a time capsule game that lives in the hearts of people like me who grew up with it, from every sleepover, from every weekend. But now that it's out, a whole new generation of gamers are going to get to experience it, and I think it's the perfect time to reflect back. So, Grant, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
All right, hello.
Yes, thank you.
So let's before we jump into GoldenEye, I want to maybe introduce people to who you two are. So let's start with take me back to kind of your origin story a little bit. We can we'll bounce from both of you, but I'm curious, to what point in your life did music do you remember the catalyst moment in your life where you decided music sound was going to be like your passion and your career? Do you remember the moment that happened, or was it just something gradual along the way that you just woke up one day and you're like, oh, this is what I'm doing for a living? So I'm curious if there's any kind of origin story to either, if Grant, if you want to kick us off.
Oh, okay. I guess, well, yeah, I'd played in bands a lot, since leaving, we did it through school and stuff. And when I left university, I just played in like bands for like 11 years, like rock bands. And I was a classically trained trumpet player. And I was played in a soul band for quite a long time, like a soul funk band, like a working band, like 4 or 5 gigs a week for like 7 years, something crazy like that.
Yeah.
We never really got anywhere, but we did lots of gigs. I played in the horn section for a rock band called Little Angels, who were quite big in the UK at the time. We did some big tours with like Bon Jovi and Van Halen and Brad Adams, and played big arenas and all that, but as the opening band. And then my friend and Graham's mutual friend, Robin Beanland, he played in one of the local bands that I played for in my local area, and he announced one day he got a job, and he was like a keyboard player, and he said, I'm going to go and work at Rare and write music for video games. And I was like, that's a job, you can do that? I just had no idea, it was like, it must be like 1994, something like that, 93 and a bit. And then off he went, and he'd been there about a year and a half, and he sort of said to me, I've been off and on unemployment benefit for like easy 11 years, like the whole time, like doing some tours, signing on the unemployment benefit, do a tour, it was like that, pretty bad. So he said, you've been on unemployment for like 11 years, don't you think it's time you got a job? And I was like, well, what can I do at 33? He said, well, why don't you try to do what I'm doing, writing music for video games? So he recommended that I buy a copy of Cubase and a synth and bits and pieces, and I sent like 5 cassette tapes off to Rare over the course of 1994, must have been. Never got a reply. And then when Graham can remember this, out the blue, because he was there, out the blue, I got a letter saying, please come for an interview, and I got the bloody job. Couldn't believe it. So absolute fluke. If Robin hadn't done it, I'd never ever have done it. So it's all Robin Beanland's fault. That's what I say.
And it wasn't just a mates thing either, because you sent umpteen tapes in, and they were getting better each time. And then it got to a stage where, right, let's get the guy in, let's talk to him. I'm not saying the ones before were terrible.
Yes, you are.
I'm just trying to say, because I don't think we were looking for anyone anyway at the time. And then as Rare was expanding, and it was expanding rapidly at that time, it's like, right, we need another musician. Grant sent another tape in, and it's like, all right, this is great, let's get him in.
That's amazing. Well, Graham, take us back to your kind of origin story. How did you kind of end up in this career that you are? Do you remember the catalyst in your life that kind of put you on this path?
Yeah. I mean, right at the start, I was plonked in front of a piano for piano lessons when I was about 6, which I found very boring, because it was all scales and all the stuff that you're supposed, all the theory and stuff like that, which as a 6-year-old, I didn't know why I was doing it. It was just something that was done, and that went on for a bit. But then I found or was given a little tiny keyboard. It was like monophonic and stuff, a little basic one. And I thought, this is much more fun than the piano. And it, as cool as it sounds, I got into my music. My instrument of choice was electronic organs, and I started going to lessons, like group lessons, and I kept getting moved up, to another skill set, or another level, and that was it. I just loved synths, loved all that kind of stuff. And around the same time, I was playing computer games, and I just thought, I want to do computer games because that's all that's all I did all day long. And I want to do music for computer games, even though, like Grant said, surely that's not a job,
Yeah.
that can't be a real thing. But yeah, I mean, that was 10 years later, then it certainly was becoming more of a known job. And I just I was living in a shared house with friends who were all working in the games industries, like Sony and I think Virgin at the time or something. And I was just flicking through a game magazine called The Edge, and at the back they used to have job adverts, and there was never any for audio or composers or musicians, but there was this one that said Rare, we want a musician, blah blah blah. And I thought, I didn't even know who they were, because they used to be known as Ultimate when I was a kid, and Ultimate did the best games on the home microcomputers at the time. I mean, it's definitely a UK stuff. I don't think it ever reached America, but their games looked miles ahead of everyone else's.
Yeah.
So I didn't know who Rare were. I didn't really think too much about where they were based, in comparison to me in the UK. I just thought I'd just send them a tape.
Right.
And yeah, like Grant said, went for the interview, got the job, and it's like, oh right, I've got 3 weeks to completely pack my house up, move to the countryside, and start a new life.
So didn't you work at a bank for a while, Graham, before that?
Oh yeah, I had office jobs.
Right.
Yeah, I left school really young because I wanted to do music. I wanted to do music as further education, and turned up on the first day, and there was only 3 people in the course, and the school just went, no, we're not going to do it. Well, I don't want to, there's no reason for me to be here. So I left, and I self-taught myself composition while I was doing these office jobs for many years. And like Grant, ended up on the dole. And not as successful as him, but played in bands and stuff like that. And all the while, writing music to sort of better myself and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a fluke that I was reading that magazine that day, saw the advert, and sent it in, and they must have been desperate because they took me on.
Well, let's go back to those early days of Rare. So I mean, you just mentioned Grant, that how you were submitting for the job, but Graham, so you were already there, and maybe paint the picture of what the days were like when GoldenEye, I guess, showed up at Rare. How did that license get to Rare? And back then, I don't know if a Bond license meant as big of a thing as it did today, because Bond games, I know there were some Bond games in the 80s, but they weren't anything kind of crazy.
Yeah. There were loads on the home micros, of Europe, like Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amstrad, those sort of systems. But they were licensed games had a bad rap back then, because it was like, well, we've got this side scrolling shooter, let's make him Bond, or let's make him Robocop, or insert film license here, and that was basically it. Also, Bond had with Timothy Dalton had kind of sort of peaked, might have been going downhill a bit. So it was like you said, not quite the catch that it used to be, which is probably why Rare got it, because it was not as desirable as it could have been. But I don't know the ins and outs of how they got it, but at the time it was going to be a Super Nintendo game, because it was just at the cusp of the Nintendo 64 was right in development, but not close to being out. I mean, the story goes that Martin Hollis, who was the team lead on that game, said, I want to do it, but I want to do it for the next gen.
Yeah.
So that's how that went, and he had quite a lot of cachet at the time, because he'd worked on the previous game, Killer Instinct, and the bosses liked what he did. So yeah, it was in those early embryonic days. That's all it was. It's like, well, this new system's coming out in 1995, which it didn't, and the film's coming out in 1995, which it did. So
Yes.
let's make the game come out then, which it obviously did. But you know, the rest is history.
Right.
You remember a game for what it's like once it's done, not how promptly it came out. So we
Yeah.
were lucky that we didn't have to force it out or rush it out.
And I think a lot of the people who were playing GoldenEye at the time were probably not even old enough to watch Bond in theaters. I actually specifically remember my parents going to see GoldenEye in theaters. Like, they're going out for date night with their friends, and I was like, I want to see that movie. And I was just like, but and I mean, I remember collecting all the VHS tapes and everything too. I mean, I had my whole Bond collection. But so when did you start working on it, Graham? And then, so Grant, were you on there yet, or were you specifically hired to come on to GoldenEye?
I think I was just hired to be the extra hand. I think at the start, I
Yeah.
feel like when I first got there, I had to do the Game Boy stuff. So I was converting Diddy Kong's Quest from the Super NES to work on the original grey Game Boy, right? And Graham was doing Graham was doing GoldenEye and Blast Corps and is it Ken Griffey or Geoffrey Griffey?
No, I was doing, crikey, there was a year where I was doing Killer Instinct conversion to the Super Nintendo.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Blast Corps, GoldenEye, and I think I was doing Killer. I don't know. There might have been another one. There might have been a Game Boy one as well. Oh,
but yeah, I thought you did Ken Griffey baseball. I thought you did that.
No, right. I didn't do that. But no, and the Killer Instinct version of the Game Boy.
Right.
So yeah, my workload was pretty packed, and yeah, Grant was here doing, talented guy doing this conversion. I mean, you were doing it by ear, aren't you? You were just playing the tape and sort of.
Well, yeah, I know, but I mean, I found it bloody hard, like,
Yeah, but it was a waste. I think it was a waste of your talent. So, I think it was just like, I was clearly doing too much. There was this guy doing hardly anything. I was doing all this stuff, and so I think you were writing tunes on spec, weren't you? Because to play to Martin.
Yeah, I remember you come to me one day and said, Grant, look, I'm doing all this stuff. Do you mind taking up a GoldenEye for a little while, till I get done with all the shit ton of work that you had to do, right? And I was like, you're kidding, I'd love to do it. So they agreed that I could do Game Boy in the morning and then
that was it.
GoldenEye in the afternoons. That's like November 95.
I was
doing that. Yeah, the Game Boy in the morning, wait to get to lunch, and then get on to GoldenEye in the afternoon, and then Graham was doing loads of other stuff, So that's how it worked out like that, yeah. And I remember like Graham had to show me how it all worked. I was like, oh my God, this is just like not easy. It was like, having to get all this. When I finally realized how you had to get the sounds into the machine, it was like, what? This is how you do it. It's going to sound awful, So Graham showed me all that stuff,
Yeah, there's certainly game music back then. I mean, I expect it's probably there's always bits that are not creative, and you're crunching numbers really. And back then we had no space memory wise, so it was fine to do the music, but then you had to somehow get it into the machine, which we didn't even have the machine really at the time. We had sort of test hardware, and no one was really sure the final specs or how many polyphony voices we could have. I mean, it was all up in the air, wasn't it, Grant?
Yeah, and I also remember it came with that standard Mario reverb that's in the Mario 64 Castle game, and that not Castle, but the first Super Mario 64. And I remember we didn't like it. It was really kind of bathroomy. So me and Graham just sat one day, and all it was a big table of numbers, wasn't it? Like we had no idea what they did. So Graham just randomly, we said, look, try that as a 16, that as a 4, and just typed in random numbers until it sounded all right to us, And it got fixed later because there's no programmer time available. They were all busy, right? So we just like sat there typing in numbers completely randomly.
Wow,
look, it's quite nice now, and so you just had to do it because no one would help you, would they?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the teams were very small. I mean, now if you work on AAA game, you could have an audio team of 12, 20 people. God knows how many, and all the jobs are very they've diversified, so it's very specialist. So
Right.
you get people doing just Foley or people doing environments, just working on speech, and then you'll get the composers and stuff. Back in those days, it was a one-man band. You had to do everything.
Because you were,
And,
you did sound design and score, right, Graham? Like you were
I'd say sound design is a very generous term for what we did back then. It's I wasn't going out with a microphone and recording, field recording or anything like that. But
before we jump into more of the intricate details, though, I'm curious, what was the directive on the game? Like when you started working, did you guys have a lot? Because of course, it's actually a very faithful adaptation of the film, and you had the likenesses of all the actors. I mean, Pierce Brosnan's on the cover, and the models are all it's very faithful of the actual plot of GoldenEye. And then of course the score itself, clearly I think drawing some inspiration from what Eric Serra did on the film, but also you guys took it to a whole new level and I think created something very signature to what the game is. So I'm curious, how much creative freedom did you guys have? What was there, like a very kind of direct map that you had to follow, or was it just like, let's just try what works? Like,
there was no, I don't think any of that was the agreement. It's just like, here, just write these tunes. I got a very loose level list from Duncan Botwood. It was just like a few sentences about each level, wasn't it? And I just wrote what I thought fitted. I had no idea really, And also we had the license to use Monty Norman's theme, right? So I'm not convinced the Bond games after that got the rights to the Monty Norman theme. I feel like we had it. I don't think the other games later did. So we could use it any way we wanted to. So we were like, fantastic, it's great to use because it's one of the all-time greatest themes of all time, isn't it? So you get to mess around with that. Was fantastic fun. And also we had that double CD, didn't we, of all the pop songs that preceded the movie. And so I was like just going through that, stealing bits all over the place, So I mean, it was super loose, wasn't it? No one, I don't think anybody really bothered what we wrote. I don't think. Really.
So was it your guys' idea to follow kind of closely the style of the film, at least score a little bit? I mean, I could hear a little of the main theme, the Bono's theme, in there a little bit, but you guys did so many amazing variations on the theme. Each level was a new take on the theme, and I'm just like, this is incredible. It never gets tired. The loop never gets boring, never irritating. So take me through all that.
I think that was one of the plus points of the game being so late, is we got to see the actual film and we got to hear the soundtrack. Because otherwise we wouldn't have taken those elements. I mean, it was very different from a classic Bond score. It was very, very, very different take. But there was clearly elements that were we liked. I mean, I remember coming back from the theatre thinking he played the den on Timps, and I thought, I'm definitely doing that. And I think the next day I went into the office and I went, dun. Eric Serra some money for that.
I mean, it was a very polarizing Bond score. I think to this day, it's still one of the most polarizing. But I think for people like me who grew up I was born in '87, and so in the '90s, I was really coming into really loving Bond. And of course, that was the big transition, a new Bond and Martin Campbell taking over and clearly trying to do something different. I know I've interviewed Eric about the score, and he kind of had, a bad time on it because he was trying something new, and they ended up replacing, the big tank chase was done without his knowledge, replacing more orchestral stuff. And what you see on the CD is what he wrote on the album. But I think it lends itself to the game so well because it was not traditional orchestral kind of flourishing John Barry. So that would have been so much harder, I think, at the time for you guys to probably mimic with the technology you had. So it probably it kind of gave yourself a platform to really just rise up and do what you guys did so well, right?
I feel like it's a kind of more of a mishmash. We mashed together electronics with strings and stuff. But I guess you call it hybrid these days. I mean, that was, it's coming to the fore, I think late 80s to now. It was getting that way where you're getting, like Hans Zimmer was doing stuff with strings and synthesizers and all that. So it's kind of already there for us to kind of pull from, And I mean, plus the fact we had such a limited, tiny little thing of music, instrument we could actually use, that you pick things that sounded half decent and hope for the best, right? Just crossed your fingers and thought, doesn't sound that great, but maybe it'll get by.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, you would know more about this than us, but as the 90s started and and progressed, there was a spate before then where orchestras weren't used as often
Right.
And there's a lot of synthy electronic scores in films at sort of late 80s and nudging into the 90s. But then I think people thought, let's get the orchestras back, they sound better. And I think we were at that crossover period which was lucky for us because there's no way we could have done convincing orchestral music given 12 or 16 voices.
No way.
And the memory. So we kind of the hybrid really worked in our favor.
Yeah, definitely.
So how did you guys split like what was the game plan when the game started? I know, Grant, you just mentioned you had just some little descriptions of the levels and then you kind of wrote to that. Was there a way were you guys talking about creating a flow? How did you split the levels? Who did what? And like, was there any kind of like structure to how you guys were approaching this and to make sure there was a flow? And once you got to the end of the cradle level, was there kind of a momentum like you're going through an album, or were you just trying to find the little oh, this is a snow level, this is more open, oh, this is more, this is needs a little bit more fun music, or caves or caverns needs a little bit I'm curious, how did you decide on the style for each track, for each level?
Well, I think basically there was no guidance whatsoever, and me and Graham, Graham started it, and then he got busy, and I took it over for a little while, and so I just went through the levels in a list, and then I got taken off to go and do Banjo-Kazooie, and Graham came back, and there was no actual planning at all. It just kind of I'm leaving now. Graham said, I'm leaving now. So
it was just like handing the baton off. It was like was there any crossover where you guys were on at the same time, or was it always just like passing it back and forth?
No, I think it was separate. I think Graham did it, then I did it, then Graham did it, and that's how it worked. There was no planning at all.
Yeah, I think the only time when we worked on it together was Grant was on it, and then the boss took him off to, like you said, do Banjo-Kazooie, and gradually we were starting to get the game starting to come together. So that's when you can actually start playing these levels with the music and sounds in, and see if it works. And I think we realized that the tunes were too short, so you went back and you extended everything you'd done. And then I think there was another point where we wanted the sort of the very it's very black and white, but there was certain points in a level where everything kicks into gear and switches into a high energy version. And I think then it was, oh, Grant, can you write one of these for every tune you've done, please? So but it was strange. There was just a list of levels, and then like I said, when the game was getting more completed, we could actually play the game and see what was working and expand on that. But that was it.
How does that work? So did they send you? So you'd write stuff kind of based on. Did you see any stills or concept art to draw from, and then before you saw gameplay? So did you have some imagery of what the levels would look like or feel like?
Yeah, I think even before I started on it, there was some very early knock-ups. You could fly through a level, and I think they were mostly made by the designers, so it's just for them to quickly block something out to start working on the gameplay. But we were so lucky to have that theme tune that but also the style of Bond films. All three of us grew up loving Bond films, and I loved the sort of the John Barry years, and so you've got something intrinsically ingrained in your head to what it should sound like. And it was at a time in game music where it didn't have to be complicated, complex and interactive like we do now. It's very much press play on the CD, well, not press play on the CD, but press play tune, start again, and blah blah blah. So for that, we could rely on the strength of the melody, and we were given all the melodies.
So would a certain level dictate how long? Because certain, I think levels had longer tracks, shorter tracks. So something like Runaway, I mean, I remember you could finish that in like 30 seconds if you wanted to. You can just on Agent just go through it, whereas something, you know, like Caverns maybe take a little bit longer. Did you take that into account of how long that piece had to be, and also given how much space you had to do it? Did you have more space to work with on the longer levels?
Well, the length of the tune didn't matter because that was just a MIDI file, so that was
Yeah.
you know, a few kilobytes or whatever. So so that data was fine. It was and they all picked from the same bank of samples. So
Okay.
length of the tune wasn't such an issue. And I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure I just wrote the tune until it sounded good. I don't think I thought, oh, this is a short level or this is a long level, because also the gameplay was being put in until the very last minute. So
Oh, wow.
and changing all the time. So when I wrote that tune, I can guarantee it was, you know, it wasn't finalized or anything like that.
No, and I feel like I don't think I ever played it. I don't think ever while I was writing the music. I don't think it was playable until after I'd finished. So I never got to play any of the levels, kind of thing. And like Graham says, it was the length of the tune was irrelevant. I mean, we were still trying to make MIDI files smaller, you know, because we were trying to save memory on those. So like if you had a repeating drum pattern that was like, you know, dunk, dunk, for one bar, rather than write that bar out 8 times, you'd put loopers at each side of that one bar to play a little thing in the menu to say play 8 times. So you saved 7 bars of, like, I mean, you think with the information in 7 bars of MIDI is like, it's bytes, right? It's absolutely tiny.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you actually loop. So if you had to go back to try to edit the MIDI file, if you the tune change, it's like, oh my god, I've got to go back to the MIDI file, and he wouldn't play because it's all in this ridiculous format of like 1 bar here of drums and the rest was blank and all that. You know, it was a total mess. So, you know, it's just, you know, I remember like. I mean, we had the system where when Graham first came out to use it, like you get to, for example, 1 note. So if you've got a clarinet, you put our sample of C3 in the middle somewhere, and then loop it till it was tiny, 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 and then you'd resample it down from 4.1 kilohertz, which is CD quality, down to like 16 kilohertz, which is like less than half quality. And we did this program called Cool Edit, didn't we? That was an audio editing program, and in a feature called Top Boost. So we used to click the Top Boost like a couple of times to try and get some more treble back on the file, and then whap it into the N64 and then try and play it. You know, and like, so because you had 1 note, it sounded right in CD, but if you played higher than that, it got Mickey Mouse. You played lower than that, it was like whoa, 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 whoa. So, you know, it was, how on earth it even sounds remotely good is, you know, to people these days is absolutely crazy. Can you think what we had to do to it to make it even sound? Even then we were cringing, like, never mind now, you know.
Yeah, I think also, I think as we went along though, we did have an audio programmer, and he wrote software so that we could sit at Cubase,
right,
write the music, and it would come out of this, come out of the hardware.
Right.
So that is how it would sound, you know, in the game, and that gave us quite a lot of creative freedom because. With some of the sounds, you could play them way down low with tons of the, you know, the rubbishy reverb that we'd invented, but you'd get these nice effects from it, which you would never have probably thought of if you were just sat with a load of pristine keyboards and sound modules and samplers and stuff. So it pushed you creatively to try and come up with something, because also by the time we got to like 20 tunes, or however many tunes there were, it's like, what can we do now to make this Bond theme sound different?
Were you guys running out of ideas?
No, but I feel like it was like, because we could actually play, like Graham said, we actually played the samples that we put into the machine. We actually could play those samples from our computers, right? So Graham said we could hear what it sounded like. So I guess some people were like writing things on full quality synths, so it sounded amazing, and then try to crunch it down and get it, and it sounded awful. So we actually played the actual things in the N64, so we knew what sounded bad. This sounds bad up here, this sounds bad down here, so you could make it, you know. I guess we had that advantage. I don't know if anybody else had that at the time, but we certainly had that. So that was a really cool thing for us to have, you know.
Wow. And so, I mean, beyond the levels, there's also, of course, the iconic Grant, your pause music. So,
I know. I would have thought it. I can, you know, if only I owned it. If only I owned that music, I could make some money out of it, for God's sake. But alas, I don't. You know,
no, but how does that even come? Like, I need pause music. What is that directive even mean, I sent you that reel that guy made, which I thought was hilarious, where the guy was
Yeah, it's
like,
great,
"Oh,
that, yeah.
when the band really got like when they knew they had something good, maybe I'll play it here." Well,
Just wanted to see how that pause music was coming along. Now keep in mind, this is a movie tie-in video game from the Nintendo 64. Not looking for anything too crazy. What do you think about this?
Tell you what, it's that damn facility. You got everyone around there doing odd jobs. You couldn't process a SAMD delivery if you tried. Hey guys, we need a song for this 007 pause music that we're working on. Listen, it doesn't need to be the hardest trap beat of 97. It's just pause music.
what was the?
I don't know. I kind of feel like, I mean, you know, I'm sure Graham agree. When it comes to the pause beat, you just kind of go, ah, it's just something to play while it's paused. You don't think much about it. It takes you 10 minutes to write, 20 minutes to write, and you forget it, you know. So I don't think I've ever thought much about any of the pause beats that I've written. I'm sure Graham's the same. It's just something you write because you have to have one, right? And I mean, it's bizarre how that's become like a little bit of a, you know, TikTok sensation. It's you just never know, do you, how these things go, things that you don't care about. I remember I wrote a tune for Band Kazooie for the squirrel that I thought was rubbish, and everyone loved it. And it's like, it's often the stuff that you don't care about that's the best stuff in it, because you just write it because you don't care. You just go, oh, that'll do, you know. And that's bizarre. I mean, it's nice to see it kicking around, you know. I just wish I got some money for it. That'd be great.
You could put some furniture in your house.
Yeah. Are you do you need help? Blink 3 times for yes. Are you being held hostage somewhere? But I mean, to this day, I think just that theme, the fact that that theme is all over the score, and the fact it probably took this long for us to get it, like the licensing, I mean, it must have been a nightmare just to get that out. And of course, there was never really a proper soundtrack release, right? There was nothing that an official. No. So to the fact that we're talking about this score that's never been officially released, that people have to rip directly from, you know, the game and create their own soundtracks, and then I think that's speaks so much to the volume of the work that you guys did and how it resonates with everybody. I mean, and but speaking more to some of the music, who did the first menu music when you log in, just the like when you're picking the mission and everything?
That was great. I did that one. Yeah,
that one
the main theme at the start was kind of me and Graham did it together. I think, you know, we kind of, I did the rock guitar in it because I'm a metal guitar player kind of thing, and Graham worked out that he could have a few little sections of guitar, you can link them together, and you can make the, because we couldn't put the whole Bond theme would be too long as a sampler to play right. But Graham worked out if I went you could get the whole theme out of those little bits right. I was like, oh great. So he put all that together. You know, so I think like you know, I mean, I think, you know, I think also that we could never get that right, could we? That we just couldn't get it to, we both had to go to it, we just couldn't get it to fit that kind of jazzy phrasing. We just couldn't get it right, so it just came out as it did, you know.
it always sounded wrong whenever I did it.
We couldn't get it right. No way.
But there's also some moments that within the game where the music shifts. Like, of course, everyone loves the elevator music from, you know, who did the elevator music?
Robin did that. Robin, that's his one piece in the game.
Oh, the one piece. That's right. He did. Yeah. And then there's another, I think in Cradle, there's a shift too. Like it has music playing. And then when you trigger Trevelyan to go down to the end, it triggers a new piece of music. I think that's the only level where there's 2 like actual like main things, right? And when it gets triggered, how was that kind of approach?
I think the jungle has one.
Zenya's battle music, right?
Because I wrote this track again. I mean, this was, I think, the second or third piece I wrote before I'd even seen anything, and it was very unsuitable. It's more like a stripper tune. I don't know what I was thinking.
For Xenia?
Yeah, well, maybe, but I hadn't seen the film by that point. But yeah, we thought, okay, let's remove the music and just rely on the ambient sounds, and then when it kicks in, we'll use the energy, the piece of that tune. And
oh no, yeah, that's right, because the jungle had no music until Xenia, right? Yeah. It was one of those all ambient sounds.
But with that thing where that was my mistake. So we had like an ambient drum sample, not drum sample, a little loop that's kind of bird noises for the jungle, right?
Yeah.
You just triggered it from MIDI file. So I just put in this big long MIDI file with one long note for like 32 bars, right? And then it would just, but if you pause the game and unpause it, because there's no new MIDI note on command, the ambience just stopped playing. So it'd go completely silent. Neither of us spotted that. And then the game came out, we're like, oh God. But I it was clearly my fault. I was thinking, no, I have no idea. So you just pause the game, turn it on again, and the ambience just vanishes. It's completely silent. It's like,
yeah, no patches in those days.
I know, right? Yeah.
It was for that level. It was always a joke with my friends and I, because it was silent until you triggered Xenia, and we'd always joke because we'd try to kill her as fast as you could. So it would just start like 3 seconds, dun dun. And then she just, and then so even to this day when I was playing, because when it came out on Switch, I it's funny, I just literally, the way my brain works, I can't remember algebra, but I can remember where every single NPC is in that. So I beat it in 2 sittings, and it was just like, yeah, it's exactly how I remember it.
And I do feel like, that sometimes, like, when if you get part of someone's childhood, like with the games that we worked on, it's sort of humbling thing, really, because I think in that kind of finite sort of 5 to 14 age group, I feel like you remember, I remember all the theme tunes for all the cartoons I like to watch back then, Scooby-Doo, Thunderbirds. I think that, with GoldenEye, the people in that little age group never forget it for the rest of their lives, right? I think that, like you remember everything about it. I don't think it's, when you work on games like we did back in the, that doesn't cross your mind until much later, when people start to go in the 20s and 30s and say, oh, I remember that, and they can talk about it way more than we can remember. I feel like it's such a weird thing that I kind of realized recently, that little finite gap of age, you just don't forget that for the rest of your life. It's crazy.
There's definitely a gap between when you write something and when you get people, oh, I just love that, because I was at uni or I was at school, and reminds me of a happier time. It's just a shame that anything I write today, I'll be dead before that happens again.
Well, talk to me about the once the game came out, it was a hit. I mean, it sold 8 million copies, I think, something like that. I mean, to this day, it's credited as, defining the first-person shooter genre. And people say, Call of Duty owes all the way back to GoldenEye, and of course, people like me who grew up on it. So was I don't remember, from my age, what the reaction was to the game. I just remember getting it for Christmas or something, and then it was there for every sleepover. So for you guys, was the reaction immediate, and did you get surprised by how much of a hit it was?
In those days, there's no internet, right? So
yeah, there was no internet.
You had to wait for the month for the magazines to review it and come out, right? So you sort of sat there with no one had any idea. And also, a lot of games go a big spike and then go like that. Where GoldenEye was a real slow burner, wasn't it, Graham? And I mean, I remember Ken Lobb saying that it sold more in the second year than the first year, and more in the third year than the first 2 years combined, which is, for a game, super unusual. Usually it's big spike at the start, then it just kind of trickles along. So GoldenEye, I feel like it sort of crept out, because it was way after the movie came out. It crept out quite quietly, and then just slowly it was, I mean, I think that I didn't really realize how big it got until maybe coming to America, even, in 2008. I feel like, the college dorms, that college dorm thing on GoldenEye was massive in America, wasn't it? That
very much
was played it till they couldn't play it anymore, and so I think that, and there's no internet, so I don't think we had any idea until much later on how well it was done.
And also, I mean, it's easy to look back now and talk about it, but it wasn't expected to be a huge game.
No,
right.
It was, I mean, the team certainly, like everyone who works on anything creatively, you lose all judgment and stuff, and you don't know.
Sure.
If this is a turkey or if it's going to be successful. And it took Nintendo by surprise, and it took them a long time to make those cartridges and get them shipped. I mean, they were getting shipped on a boat from China. I mean, it's very different from the day where, next day delivery on absolutely anything you want. So they were constantly having trouble trying to get the numbers into the stores.
Wow.
And it
I still
just
have my
kept-
cartridge.
it just kept on going, didn't it? And
Mm.
and where we worked, we were very insulated from a lot of stuff. Like Grant said, I mean, they might have had the internet back then, but it was only in one room of the
That's right. Yeah, in the
premises,
house. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
on
You
one
knock off the
machine.
phones, yeah, to check your email.
Yeah. Nothing. Yeah.
Um,
Nothing.
And we were such a microcosm back then that you
Yeah.
worked on these things, and then by the time it came out, you'd be working on something else. And like Grant said, you know, it was magazines back then, so you get a review and go, oh yeah, they like it, but that was it. There was no, you know, people commenting saying this is rubbish or this is great, or you had no idea.
Did
Also,
it?
yeah, sorry, but Rare like to
Sorry.
be sort of super secretive too, didn't they? They like to keep it very secret. We never did any
Mm.
interviews. It was this kind of very clandestine thing. And they used to always say, let the games do the talking. We're not pop stars, let the games do the talking. We just make them. We're not this, that. And as Graham was saying before, they were trying to, even at some points, keep our names off the credits on the game, so no one knew who made it and all that stuff. So it was just the way it was a bit Rare. They just wanted to let the games do the talking a bit. And the Stamper family themselves were very kind of private and very secretive. You know,
Yeah.
That's the way they were. So that's the way the company was. So we never got to meet anybody outside the company for like years. You know, but it's sat in those four walls, you know, that place, and like, you know, we occasionally went for a curry, and that was about it. You know, so it wasn't like a party place. It was like in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing in Twycross apart from a private school and one pub, which was awful, and a tractor repair place, wasn't there? And I think that was it. It was the tiniest village in the middle of nowhere. So there was nothing, you know.
That is crazy to me, because I mean, now it's so funny. After I beat the game, and I mentioned before we started recording, you know, once I beat the game, I went back and you can still enter the old cheat codes the same way you could with the left, right, up, down, R2, blah, blah, blah. So thankfully, I couldn't get my hands on that wireless N64 controller that Nintendo has always sold out for the Switch, but my brother had it. So I brought it downstairs because I was trying to break my brain, trying to remap what everything was for those codes. So I just used that. And then when I unlock, of course, all the extra bonus characters in multiplayer, for the first time to this day, when I saw your names there, everything clicked. I saw Graham and Grant as two selects, and then when you pick them, the character designs, I'm like, oh my God, those are your faces. Because growing up, my friends and I literally named every face. We named them after famous actors. Graham,
Right.
you were Ed Harris, and Grant was who do we name? Oh God, Grant. Oh, who's the guy from Little Miss Sunshine? I forget.
Oh, I don't know.
But we're all actor names. So we were just like, I had, you know, like George Clooney was named one of them, and then I guess they were just all the face designs were just developers and people work on the team for all the
Yeah.
NPCs.
Mm.
That is so funny.
Yeah, I think because I think Brett did that, didn't he? He did that all that, didn't he? And I think because Ken, a lot of the Nintendo, Ken Lobb's in there, isn't he? Is he Nintendo staff? He is on one of the faces, isn't he? I think.
Would have thought so. Yeah.
Yeah, just
sure.
all the rest stuff, wasn't it? Like anybody that Brett could find to take a photograph of.
Yeah, it was just like, yeah, there's like just JPEG wrapped around or whatever. But
yeah,
and then you see, like, you know, then you hit the credits, and then, you know, David Doak, Dr. Doak was one of the characters from Facility, and it's just it seemed like such a small, kind of intimate team that made this, you know, you can feel the love, and I think the care, and even though it seemed like it was just like you're flying by the seat of your pants and trying to get things done, but it did seem like a small group of people who did it. It didn't seem like a big corporate, you know, machine of a game. So
no, I think when you see that picture, was that one outside the block with those the Japanese guys there, and I just thought, God, there wasn't many, but I feel like the team was bigger than it was. It was like 12 people. It was like tiny, wasn't it?
Yeah,
like, I know, and like most of us had no idea what we were doing, really.
Right.
And there's no big corporate overstructure going, or focus groups like you get these days. It's just us lot going, I don't know, I think it sounds good like that. And Graham said, I quite like this. And you know, there was no, and then when they're making the levels, they were like, making this to a corner here and turn it around here. And, you know, nobody really knew what they were doing. And I kind of feel like sometimes with games these days, lots of people know what they're doing, and it's not the right way to do it. You should not know what you're doing. You know?
Well, games these days get shipped out when they're broken, and you know, the first generation of people playing it are just the focus group testers, and as they fix it for a year.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I like to see you get the massive day one download of like a gigabyte, you know. Back then, you had to go out the way it was. You couldn't fix it. It was done. That was it, you know. So, you know, I think Rare Games seems to be pretty stable bug-wise, but, you know, it was just no one had any idea what was going on. I certainly didn't. I just Graham told me what to do. I just did it. So I didn't know what's going on.
Yeah, we were very much left to our own devices. And as was the whole team really.
Mm.
I mean, Nintendo would get involved and annoyed when it was clear that we were going to miss yet another deadline.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it started getting a bit hairy. But for the most part, it was. I mean, the Stampers had their projects that they were, that was their team. So we had Tim Stamper that was doing the Donkey Kong games, and Banjo Kazooie as was, and Chris Stamper was his pet project was Blast Corps, and so they were very focused on those and just sort of left everyone else. As long as it wasn't going wrong, they gave us a lot of creative freedom, and there was no.
Yeah.
It was before the days of producers. We didn't have any producers there.
No.
We didn't have any milestones. No, I don't think I had one meeting ever. The only meeting we ever had was at E3 once when Howard Lincoln was saying, "We need to get these games out, or we're in trouble." We're all sat there like, "Oh no!"
Oh my God, yeah, we're all completely shitting ourselves. Remember that? Yeah.
So did you guys get any creative feedback on the game or on the music at all, or was it just like, here it is, and they just put it in? Did they ever say, hey, you should tweak this, hey, you should do that? Was there any, or it was just like, this is what we think is great, and then you made it work, and that's what's in the game?
Yeah, I don't think I got any feedback at all. I mean, I think Hollis maybe commented a bit at the start, but then gave up, and then I just put in what I liked. And I think you said yes, Hollis did talk to you a bit, Graham. he did talk to me that much, so I didn't really.
Yeah.
I just plugged it in and helped.
We'd probably talk more about sounds and stuff, but I think once we got rolling with the tunes, and we'd always play the tunes to the team. Back in the day when you used to record it on a cassette tape and take it over to them, someone would put it in their hi-fi. I think once they realized that they could, we were so to speak, a safe pair of hands, and we weren't going to ruin it. They were quite happy with what we came up with. I don't think there was anything that, well, I can't remember. I mean, it is a long, long time ago, but I don't think there's anything that someone said, "Oh, that's terrible. You've got to change that."
No, I feel like we just, but like I say, once we got the sound palette sorted out, I mean, knew where we were going with it. It just all kind of fit together, and it's just a case of, how can I use the Monty Norman tune differently in the next tune and the next one? Like, it's basically that's all I ever did. Like, here's the theme, dress it up how you like.
It is quite amazing, because I'm pretty sure that if you did that today, then that everything we wrote would be going through level. It would go right back to MGM and
Barbara Broccoli would be giving you a phone call.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Barbs were available.
Next Bond film with the reboot. Here we go. We need these two.
Monty's no longer with us, but I bet if he was, I'm sure I want Last Refusal and all this kind of stuff, and there'd be rewrites, reworks, and all this sort of stuff, which you get now. But it's crazy thinking about it. How we were just a bunch of people that three of us had done a game before, and the rest of us were straight out of college or from
off the dole.
Off the dole. And it's the James Bond license. Go on, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So Graham, your credit, you mentioned that how sound design was like a very generous credit, but I'm curious in terms of what did that encompass? Were you responsible for sound effects, or were you responsible for anything within the sound of the game other than music?
No, I did the sound effects, but I mean, when I say sound design, but it was back then all we did was use stock sounds. I
need to know where the grunts came from. What library was?
Blimey. Well, they would either be a Hollywood Edge Premiere Edition or a Sound Ideas 6000.
So it was just some library, those grunts and everything. Yeah.
One tip I'd say to everyone, after that is, if you put something as placeholder, don't put it in as placeholder, because it will stay there forever. You won't go back and change it. Because I just stuffed. I remember where they came from. I was putting together I was putting sound onto a Betamax one day for a show, and there was no game. It was all fudged and stuff. So there was no audio in the game. So I just stayed up one night and plonked all the sounds onto it. And those were the sounds I used, and those were the sounds that ended up in the final game. I mean, why on earth we didn't record the people?
I am so glad that's what happened, though, because I mean that's what made the game fun. And I think it continues today, how games are trying to find this realism, but there's always going to be that aspect of unrealism that makes the violence, even though violence, of course, in reality is nothing to laugh at, but the game violence to me was just so funny, where you'd shoot a guy 5 times and he'd just be, oh, and then, just, collapse, or he does this long animation of holding his head or like laying on the ground, and just the shortness of the grunts. It always reminded me of like, David Zucker movies, like, the Leslie Nielsen stuff, a lot of the ADR that just doesn't match up right quite, but it just added to the experience and made everything so perfect. And it was
there's a lot of arrogance of youth back then, and most of the stuff, there was a lot of stuff that we did just because we found it funny, which it's not the way I'd recommend you do stuff these days, but if it made us laugh, it stayed in. And in a way, there was always humor in the Roger Moore films.
Yes,
there's that bit when the car goes over the bridge and they've got like a Swanee whistle playing. It's like, really? Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
And also, I think the ricochets were like really over the top, weren't they, on the gun?
Oh, they're like spaghetti westerns. Yeah,
yeah,
like a Sergio Leone like library you got.
I feel like all that kind of John Woo, wasn't it? That Martin used to always say the John Woo movies back then was super over the top. The ricochets were crazy, and like I remember Graham going, "I'm just going to put these in, and it's going to be crazy." But everyone thought they were great, and it was just fantastic. I think that I think part of it, that whole over the topness of it all.
There's a scene when I don't know which one it is, but Lee Van Cleef he keeps going to pick up his hat, and
that's right,
keeps shooting it. And you've got these insane ricochets. And me and Martin were just watching it, and he was bent over laughing. And so we just went with it. It's like, what are you doing?
And the sound of the guns, like I mean, I feel like those still influence like what we think of a silencer, what it sounds like from just the PP7 being fired, whatever you used for like that.
Again, that was a stock sound, and to me that was the sound that silencer made, because if you watch those films from the 70s and 80s, they all use that sound. I mean,
right? Yeah,
it's crazy now, because I get a lot of people asking about what's now known as the Diddy laugh, and it's Diddy Kong Racing. You turn it on, and there's these children laughing as Diddy Kong's flying around his thing. It was just a stock sound, but it's used everywhere, and people have made lists of all the places, and they're trying to find out where it originally came from. And back then that was all we did. We didn't, because we were, like I said earlier, one-man bands. You didn't have people whose life and passion was sound design and
right.
Like that. It was just, and you also do sounds, and I'd never done that. I was a composer, and I've learned as I've gone on. But that was one of the first games I worked on, so that's where it shows. And I have to hold my hands up and say, well, we didn't know any better. That's what we thought we had to do.
Oh, it was the best. I mean, I still, when they run over a guy who's already dead and he still screams from the tank, and the yelp.
But I grew up thinking that's what those sounds made. There's another sound that isn't like used in Blast Call, which is when a plane lands. It always makes the same noise. It does 2 squeaks. It does that. And if you watch any plane being landing in a film or TV,
the fire screech.
Use the fire screech. It's the same as when anyone picks up a microphone in a film. There's always a bit of feedback, but that magically goes away without doing anything. And I think I just thought, well, that's what things sound like. That's how I didn't really put any more thought into it than just copycatting other films and TV programs.
And I remember there's one sample, like one hawk sample on all those CDs. Literally one hawk, it's like a screech, and like it was the only one you could find in those. We had like massive libraries of these CDs, and like that's still the one you hear in like TV adverts to this day when a burger's across. It's the same screech that you hear. And that was like 1995. It hasn't changed since then. It's the same one.
Yeah, those collections have been around since the 80s, I think.
Yeah, they have.
I think they came out on either reel tapes or vinyl.
Wow.
Back then.
There's a squeaky door one that I think everybody uses, just the metal door hinge, just like a lot. I mean, it's the exact same sound effect like being used, just copy pasted. It's because like the screams, like I mean, the Wilhelm scream is one thing that's become an inside joke, but there's another scream that my brother and I grew up laughing at because it was so comical. We called it the John Woo scream because he used it in Broken Arrow and Face Off, and then he heard it recently in Battlefield 2042, and literally his character flew off, and it's like and he just started dying laughing. Like, what is this doing here? Like, it's just so the fact that this permeates out of the work and can influence other people. I mean, I find it fun and engaging, and the fact that we're talking about it now, I think this is awesome.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So
yeah. These Easter eggs that are known to the people who love the stuff that they're watching. Yeah, absolutely. But so after GoldenEye came out, remind me of the timeline of so Perfect Dark followed, of course,
right?
And was that, how soon did Perfect Dark come? Was it still being in development with GoldenEye, or did it come later? I forget. I don't even remember the timeline. Sorry, I didn't.
No, it was the same team.
Yeah.
With a few extra people, because there was too few people working on it. So yeah, that was a slow start because they were thinking about the story and trying to figure out the locations and stuff, but it was all built on the same engine,
right?
So
was there any pressure that GoldenEye was a big success, or did you know about the success yet of when Perfect Dark was coming, or is it just like, here's the next game, let's just get to this one?
At the time it was, here's the next game, because like we said earlier, GoldenEye was a very slow and steady
build.
So it was just, right, that team now does something else. That was more or less how it worked, right? Wasn't it? The teams stayed together at the time.
Yeah, but I remember that I think Eon wanted Rare to do the next movie license, didn't they? And I remember, because I think, did you do the first studio tour and you went down to see it? So after GoldenEye was done, I went down with some of the team to look at the next film, which was World's Not Enough. Is that the next one?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Elliot Carver, all that one. The big skyscraper with the fall down it, and
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah. So I went down to watch some of that getting filmed. We were watching that scene with the helicopter where he's on the bike and it slides on the ground, and that we watched it kind of said hello to Pierce and all that. But I think at that point, Rare already knew that they weren't going to do the next game, but we all went down anyway because it was a free trip to watch some film in Bond, right? But I think Rare thought, why should we write another game, another Bond game, because we're going to give money away in licensing when we can write our own game and keep all the money. So I feel like, obviously Graham was going to do Perfect Dark completely by himself. I was doing banjo at that point. So
yeah.
But then, of course, after Perfect Dark started, Mr. Norgate decided to resign from Rare, so and go and form Free Radical and go off to Wonderful Adventures. So I was doing Banjo 2 in DK64 at the same time, and then he said to me, Graham's left, can you do Perfect Dark as well? I was like, I did 3 of those games, because bloody Mr. Norgate decided to go and leave, so I had to pick up the reins again. I got all these hand-me-downs.
Those are good hand-me-downs, though. To this day, I think that era of Rare still shines so brightly for so many people. And I mean, the fact that I can also play Banjo-Kazooie on the N64 expansion pack, and I know Perfect Dark is locked up with like Xbox and everything, but I mean, the fact that people can still visit these games and play them, and I think it's just fantastic. And the legacy that they leave for something, and just hearing that from you two tonight, hearing those stories of just how it's just you guys just trying to mess around and don't know what the fuck you guys were doing, but and ended up making the most iconic game of all time. I think that's the most beautiful story of everything. And I think it just shows why, all these big AAA corporate things, and from movies to cinema to music, where it's, the magic comes from like stuff like that, where it's from just pure people just figuring stuff out, doing what they love, and working on a team, like that. So
yeah, I sometimes feel like all that kind of focus groups, I think it's done these days. Games get made by committee these days, so it's all everybody likes it a little bit, but nobody likes it a lot. And I feel like back at Rare in those days, it was kind of one strong vision from the team lead most of the time. You had a real strong vision, and we just all went on with it, I think sometimes these days in games, because it's tested out on focus groups and God knows what, it gets watered down. You get this kind of game that everyone likes a little bit, but not a lot, And I think that's something that is going to change these days. But back when we did it, because none of us had any idea what we're doing really, I just thought, if it sounds right, you don't care what process went into it. It sounds right to me. And I sometimes feel that sometimes, sound guys these days use lots of tools, and that's because it is the tools you're supposed to use. And I always say, and I'm sure I know Graham does, it doesn't really matter what tools you use. If you've got 50 plugins or none, what does it sound like? If it sounds great, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what the toolpath is or how clever you are. It's like, does it sound any good? No, it doesn't. Why did you bother?
Yeah, no, I
Absolutely.
agree. It's not how you get there, it's what comes out at the end, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think. And you know, there's a lot to be said about the less you know about something, the more the more risks you take.
Well,
and God, we couldn't have known much less.
well, I'm glad you guys didn't know much less, and I'm glad you guys took the risks because, yeah, I can speak for everyone just who loves this game. And thank you so much for sitting down tonight and taking the time to reflect with me. And this is such a joy. And I can't wait to go play as your characters and battle out as Graham and Grant in multiplayer
Awesome.
now, online.
Ed Harris, I'm taking that as
Ed
my
Harris.
default.
You got the best one there, Graham. You did very well there.
No, wait, before we log off, I do Greg Kinnear. That's who you were. That's what just popped in my head. Grant.
All
You were
right,
Greg Kinnear because you
All
had
right.
like the way your lips looked on that model. Like,
All right.
I don't
I need to look him up to make sure.
So, but again, guys, thank you tonight. I think that was an amazing conversation, and yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Anytime, Kurt.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'll just see you soon when you get back to LA.
Absolutely.
Yeah.